Coming up on this week's show, the next mini console has been announced.
How to play Elden Ring on Game Boy.
And we get the inside story on Road Rash with Randy Breen.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every week with our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. Now, if you want to read all about the foundations of the video game industry, check out Atari 2600 and 7800, a visual compendium detailing how Atari kick-started gaming in the early 70s and dominated the industry for the next decade. Looking at the systems, the games that changed it all. You can check that out on the rest of their retro gaming books at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 331, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to this week's podcast, every single weekend, taking you on a journey inside the world of classic video games. And of course, bringing you up to speed on all the big stories from the last 7 days and chatting to a veteran of the video games industry, and this week, my word, Road Rash. We can talk more about that with our special guest, Randy Breen. We'll tell you more about that in just a minute. Now, actually, I did say that we bring you up to speed on everything that's been happening over the last week. There was a couple of big stories that we missed out on last week's episode because, admittedly, we never like to miss a week, and Joe and I were on holiday, so we recorded a little bit early, didn't we, the week before? But that does mean we missed out on the massive news about the Mega Drive Mini 2.
The curse of recording early is as soon as you record it, then you're done, and all the news comes out the next day.
It happens all the time. I'm not going to say what, because we'll have to talk about it next week, but something has literally just been announced while we've been on, literally within the last 5 minutes. It is the curse. It happens all the time to us. Like, we record on Tuesday nights, we will finish, and then literally one of us will put something in our Facebook chat and just be like, have you seen this new Sonic game? It's just been announced. And we're like, brilliant. You know what we need then? A patron stretch goal, daily Retro Hour episode. Yeah, oh gosh.
That could be a thing.
Could be a thing, daily.
They would decline, wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, it has been a very relaxing week for me. I've been, soaking up the sunshine. Joe's actually been checking out some seaside arcades over the last week. I loved your pictures that you shared on our Insta.
Yeah, I went up to Scarborough on the Yorkshire seaside with my mum and my daughter and wife. Just a little caravan holiday, taking it old school. Haven't done anything like that in a while, and it was nice. I haven't been up that way in decades, to be honest. And checked out all the seaside arcades, and it was fun. Obviously, I posted on our Facebook and socials and stuff that it's obviously changed very much. And obviously, I wasn't like expecting to be like, oh, here's House of the Dead, here's Simpsons Arcade. Like, I'm not an idiot. I know arcades aren't like that anymore. It is mainly gambling machines, claw machines, 2P pushers, lots of virtual reality games, loads and loads of VR games. But I did manage to find a couple of old schoolish racing games, Daytona.
A few gems there.
Yeah. Found Daytona USA, which was pretty cool. Found an old Ghost Recon Squad, I think it's called Ghost Squad Sega cabinet, which was really cool. And then found the new Tomb Raider had an arcade machine, which was really hard. It was really cool.
I played that. Yeah, it's multiple people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's four player.
Thousands of people.
Yeah, it's a shooter. It was a shooter. So shooter screen, first person shooter, but it's
like
Tomb
a
Raider.
rail shooter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a rail shooter, but the guns were like the Time Crisis guns. They had the recoil on them, which I thought was really cool, but really hard. I like to think I'm quite good at like shooters, like Time Crisis and House of the Dead and stuff, but this was particularly difficult. But it was really, the main thing was it was just really nice to get away. And
actually, I think if I went to Scarborough again, though, I mean, last time I was there was probably about 1990.
Yeah, your old stomping ground, isn't it, Scarborough?
Well, we used to go there in the summer, quite a bit, and it was, I remember playing the Sega R360 for the first time on the seafront of Scarborough. And obviously, like you said, Simpsons, and in my mind, it is still like that.
Yeah.
So it might depress me a bit if I went back these days and it wasn't all there anymore.
Don't get me wrong, it looks like that. Like, it's very old school and old fashioned, but I liked that. The arcades have still got that real, they've not been decorated in a while and stuff, but it's just, it's all modern games and stuff. It was fun. Blew my wife's mind. I won 2 claw machines on my first 2 goes. Which absolutely blew her mind, and won some Sonic teddies, like a little Knuckles teddy and stuff, which I gave to my daughter.
That's some major cool points for you there, mate.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm glad to hear the decor hasn't been updated. Probably still my vomit stain on the.
Oh yeah, maybe right next to the Golden Axe arcade machine.
Having too much candy floss after going on the R360. But yeah, I mean, we are getting out and about again, which is the main news. And I mean, actually, we are going to be going doing an amazing retro gaming event that Ravi and I went to. Couple of summers ago, pre-pandemic, didn't we? Which is amazing to see that it's going to be back on. We're going to be back up on stage doing panels again for the first time in a couple of years at the wonderful Retro Messe in Norway. Now, this is, I mean, we've done events all over the world. This has always been one of my favourite events to attend.
It's a really nice event. Like the whole kind of Scandinavian area, we get to meet a lot of people from there. So I remember last time there were people from Finland. There were people from the Arctic as well, and
we have a surprising amount of listeners in Norway in that area.
Yeah, and it's quite a small event. Norway's a small country, but it's just got so much passion and it's so focused. The only thing that gets me is the 1 hour of darkness at night. So I can never sleep at the event. I just have to drink through it.
Yeah, so it's we're going to be doing this on the weekend of the 20th and 21st of August. If you're anywhere near, it's Sandefjord, isn't it, in Norway?
Yeah.
Wonderful event. So if you're looking for something to do this summer, you want to come and hang out with us, and we're going to be doing a few live panels as well. We'll put the details in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into all these big news stories, the Mega Drive 2, that Resident Evil 4 remake, this week's special Guess My Word. You and I were so hyped to do this one, Ravi. Being, lifelong fans of Road Rash. I mean, I love my racing games, but there's something about being able to play a racer where you can actually lean over off your bike and punch your opponent in the face.
Mate, I absolutely adored Road Rash. I remember when I was a kid, my dad ran a fine art computer department at the university, and they'd all have all these Amiga machines, and they'd all be using them for animation and stuff, and I just had a copy of Road Rash, and I'd go in there, load it up, and the students would be like, you can play Road Rash on this. And we're just I probably ruined a lot of people's projects by distracting them with Road Rash. It was such a good title. It went on with so many good developments as well. I remember the 3DO version was absolutely awesome as well later on with the digitized stuff. And I think it's one of these series that could do so well these days, and it's like one of these lost gems. But Randy worked on so many titles, and he's got a huge industry background. He worked on one that you loved as well, Dan, Fade to Black.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of the original Flashback game by Delphine Software, and one of my, still probably in my top 10 games of all time. Fade to Black was the one that came out on the PlayStation. I believe the PC might have got a version of it too, when it went 3D. And I must admit, it took me quite a bit to get my head around, the kind of transition to 3D. As a lot of games then did kind of struggle with that, didn't they? Including Road Rash 3D that we talk to Randy about as well. A very interesting time, and obviously working for Electronic Arts in that era. I mean, there's so much going on, such a big change in the industry from the 80s to the 90s. And then we kind of go into Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine as well. So there's lots in this interview, and he's a really interesting guy as well. So we're going to get the story on mainly Road Rash. That's mainly what we'll talk about in this interview, but also touching on, Fade to Black and a very kind of obscure game, Labyrinth of Time. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else remembers that apart from me.
I remember it was like a Myst style game, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, for the CDTV, God.
Yeah, can you get any more obscure than that? So, a lot in this interview with this week's wonderful guest, Randy Breen. He'll be on the show in around half an hour from now. So the story that everyone tweeted us about last week, guys, how have you missed this? Sega have announced a new mini console.
We didn't miss it. We just recorded ahead. We need to get that clear. But so many people, even on our Facebook page, people putting it on our page and stuff like that, which we love because of it is tough sometimes to get, all the news articles that we do get and stuff like that. Yeah. Sometimes, it is helpful when we get these, but we definitely didn't miss the Mega Drive Mini 2 announcement, which is really...
I was in my jacuzzi in Turkey reading about this, thinking, damn!
Is it Mega Drive or Genesis?
It's Mega Drive. It's a Japanese announcement. It will obviously be the Genesis 2 in America. But so far, they've only announced it as the Mega Drive 2 with a Japanese release date, which is October 27th this year for 9,980 yen, which is $75 and about the same in pounds, about £70, which I think is how much the first one was. And obviously the first one came out in October 2019, So 3 years since the last one. Obviously, Mega Drive Mini 2, it's based on the Mega Drive 2, so the smaller square unit. Obviously, they've only shown off the Japanese one so far, so it's got like the pink control, the pink like cartridge flaps, and it's got different coloured. It's got a silver and a blue button, whereas the British Mega Drive 2 was black and red. So I'm sure we will get that because they did that with the Mega Drive 1. They gave us the British looking one, in Power Region and stuff, so which is really cool. But what's really interesting about it is it's 50 games. The last one was 42. This one's going to be 50. But it looks as though half of them are going to be Sega CD games, which is...
Yeah, so there are different games that are on there. So a lot of people are like, they're just repackaging the first one.
But no.
I think hardware-wise, there probably are just like making a new case for it and putting it in. But then adding new titles and stuff. To me, I'm not so inspired by this Mini. I'm not really that bothered, to be honest.
I will probably more than likely buy it because I'm a Sega fanboy. I think and I think you raise a good point with the hardware thing there, which is something I wanted to bring up, which is kind of two stories into one. But I think it's really cool that they're doing the Mega CD in there. But I think you're completely right, Ravi. I don't think they've changed the hardware. I think it's the exact same on the inside.
It's like a transplant, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've just changed the case. I'll quickly go through what games have been announced so far. I think there's 12 so far. So we've got Slipheed, which is a Mega CD game, Shining Force CD, Sonic CD, Mansion of the Hidden Souls for the Mega CD, Pop Full Mail, the CD, Virtual Racing for the Mega Drive, Bonanza Bros, Shining in the Darkness Mega Drive, Thunder Force 4, Magical Taroto, and Fantasy Zone, which is a new Mega Drive port, apparently. So some pretty interesting games on there so far. Some really hard to get a hold of Mega CD games, which is cool. I'm really hoping Night Trap is on there. I think that'll be wicked.
I think it's weird, this choice of games. So like you look at like Virtua Racing, and that was one of these carts that had extra things in there, and also there was extra stuff on the Mega CD. Do you think by putting these Mega CD titles in it and stuff, they're trying to define it from the original, like, because there wasn't much definition other than a redesign and a little bit of improvements originally between the Mega Drive 1 and 2. But maybe with the Mini, they're trying to market it so it seems a bit more advanced,
So interesting that you should say that. So there has been, since this was announced, there has been articles released. This came from Famitsu magazine. And this is an interview with the hardware producer, the lead producer of the Mega Drive Mini 2. I'm going to butcher his name, as I always do. Yosuke Okanari, I believe his name is. And essentially, he addresses the fact that it isn't a Sega Saturn Mini and it isn't a Sega Dreamcast Mini. So I won't go through it verbatim. But essentially, what he says is, of course, we know people want the Sega Saturn Mini and the Dreamcast Mini. Of course, we completely understand that. But if they're being perfectly honest, it's actually really difficult for manufacturing and new chipsets during the pandemic. So if we forged ahead with a Saturn Mini anyway, it would be extremely expensive, and the likelihood would be that a Saturn Mini would cost the same as an authentic modern console.
Yeah, looking at the Saturn emulation, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
And same with the Dreamcast,
So they're fully aware that it is just a redo of the first Mini, and they're putting different games on it, and essentially it's the same hardware being used, but that hardware is powerful enough to run the Sega CD games, maybe 32X games. That would be really cool if we get.
I was going to ask that because Virtual Racing, I remember that there was a 32X version of that, wasn't there? And I wonder which version they're going to put on here.
It's the Mega Drive version, it says.
Right.
But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they do the 32X games on there as well. But I think it's cool that they're just being honest, and they're just like, yeah, it would cost loads for us to do a Saturn Mini or Dreamcast Mini at the moment.
The reason I will buy it is for Sonic CD.
Yeah.
And I just think if they're going to release a Mega CD one in the future, which they could do, are they kind of shooting themselves in the foot by adding in Sonic CD and a few of these like Shining Force and stuff?
Yeah, it does beg that question of why have they just not done a Sega CD Mini?
Because would like Night Trap then be the Sega CD Mini launch title.
Well, they did do the little kind of fake tower of power, didn't they, for the original one? So they might do like a Mega Drive 2 that you can slot on the side, a Mega CD 2, that'll fit on the side of this. So it'll look like it, maybe. I can imagine them releasing a dummy one of them.
That would be fun if they did that.
Yeah.
But long story short, it sounds as though, here's the Mega Drive 2. It looks cool. They've got the Sega CD games on there. Dreamcast and Saturn Mini ain't coming at the moment because it's too expensive and we ain't got the chips.
And I think that makes sense as well. We're talking about transplanting the hardware. If they're running out of ways to make new pieces of hardware, and it's harder with the shortages and everything, maybe just having that old hardware retransplanted is the easiest option for them.
Yeah.
And myself, I was never a huge fan of the aesthetic of the Mega Drive 2, compared to the original one. I always think the Mega Drive 1 is such a nice looking system. But I think, the fact that really, if they do release it in the West, they haven't confirmed it yet, but they did say the aim of this project is something that will have global appeal. So I imagine that is kind of a confirmation that it will be coming out in the rest of the world. It's really, if it costs like 70 quid, it is a good way to get hold of some games that are actually quite hard to get hold of these days, a lot of those Mega CD titles.
Well, if you want to grab just a Sega CD, an original authentic Sega CD, I haven't checked the prices recently, but I know they're £100 plus. That was 5-6 years ago, even for a Sega CD 2. The Sega CD 1, I saw a boxed one for £500 on Instagram the other day. And then the games aren't cheap. I know Sonic CD isn't the most expensive game, but you're probably looking almost half the cost for just the game for Sonic CD. When I saw the Doncaster
gaming market, it was 50 quid.
There you go.
Yeah, they wanted for
Sonic CD. So this will be a much cheaper alternative. Like you say, 70 quid. If you want to play these games, and some of these Japanese ports, Shining Force CD and stuff like that. I'm not even sure off the top of my head if some of these games even came out in PAL territory. So to be able to, if we're going to get them over here, for some hardcore fans, I imagine that's going to be a really big deal for them.
Yeah, and for hardcore, it makes sense that they're going to buy this. Sega probably listen to our podcast and be like, what would Joe buy?
Yeah.
What can we put out that he's going to buy again? How can we make him buy the same thing?
Streets of Rage, Golden Axe. Yeah.
So, cool to see something new from Sega. And again, I totally understand that, in the middle of a chip shortage, it is going to be difficult for them to do like a Dreamcast and Saturn. But, they haven't ruled it out ever. It might happen when that kind of sorts itself out, hopefully. They obviously understand the demands there, but, for now, it looks like we're getting a Mega Drive Mini 2, hopefully before the end of this year. So I'll link up the announcement. You can check out the full games list. I'll put it in our show notes at theretrohour.com. But it seems you're going to be a little bit distracted anyway, Joe, because the announcement last week, another big one, Resident Evil 4 is getting a remake.
It's in my diary, March 24th, 2023, taking the day off work, taking the day off Retro Hour, so I can blitz this game. Not the most retro. I appreciate that. Resident Evil 4, the original came out in 2005. So 17 years ago. Is that retro? It's retro enough.
It's getting there.
Resident Evil 4 remake. I've been waiting for this for many years. It's been rumored for about 3 years. We had obviously the Resident Evil 2 remake in 2019, and then we had the Resident Evil 3 remake in 2020, and then we got Resident Evil 8, which is Resident Evil Village, in 2021. So it's kind of like, what's going to be next? And there's all these big rumors that Resident Evil 4 was coming, and then it came out on the Oculus Rift, didn't it? Which was kind of a VR version of the original Resident Evil 4. So I was a little bit like, okay, so is this the remake or is there an actual remake? But yeah, last week at the Sony State of Play event, they announced a teaser trailer, State of Play trailer, the Resident Evil 4 remake, and it just looks... We won't go into it too much because it's not retro, but it looks stunning. I'm a modern gamer as I am a retro gamer, and I know, Ravi, you like your graphics and stuff as well. This game looks, it looks absolutely beautiful. I think it's gonna look well and truly next gen, and it is gonna have PlayStation VR content on there as well for the VR2. I can't remember what that's called. I'm not that modern, but I know there's a new PlayStation VR coming out, and they've said that it's gonna have compatibility with that and stuff.
It's getting a PC release as well as Xbox and PlayStation.
Yeah. It'll be on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC and stuff like that. But so far, we've not got much. But it's in the same vein as the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remake. You know, it looks like they're probably using the RE engine, which they made for Resident Evil 7, which I just think Resident Evil 2 remake, I know you guys aren't big horror fan guys, like horror game guys, but it's probably the most beautiful modern.
I've still not played it, and I'm a big Resi 2 fan, actually.
You should jump on it.
I really need to get
the
down.
graphics.
Like, that appeals to me more.
Beautiful might not be the best word to describe a game where people are getting like their faces eaten off and stuff like that, but the graphics are phenomenal, and the graphics on this look absolutely phenomenal. I'm so excited for it. Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil series, you guys know, is like my favorite series of all time, and it looks bang on. I know we've only seen like 30-40 seconds of it so far. It looks absolutely bang on, and I'm so excited for it. And that's me going to stop blabbering about it now.
Well, I know the original games. I mean, we've done episodes talking about our favorite games of all time. And if you listen to the After Hours podcast that we do, we kind of go more into this. But I know for you, that game kind of held a special place in your heart because it came out on the GameCube, which I know everyone kind of trashed the GameCube as being like a baby's toy. And then Resident Evil 4 came out on there. Yeah,
there's the whole big story about like how Capcom kind of sided with Nintendo when it came to the 6th gen, and I think it was
the Capcom 5.
Yeah, the Capcom 5 exclusives, and it ended up being the Resident Evil remake, and then Resident Evil 4, and Resident Evil 4 has the little like only 4 GameCube, like in the corner of it, for it then to come out on PS2 and every single console after that. There is even, PS4 and Xbox One versions of the original Resident Evil 4. It's been re-released that many times, on everything. There's a Wii version, there's a PS3 version, Xbox 360 version, there's even, iPhone versions of it and stuff like that. So, but it is a very, very special game for me, and to this day is regarded as, it came out in 2005, such a game changer to like action horror games and just action games in general. It had been done before, that over the shoulder shooter, but Resident Evil 4 was like the game that just like, it wrote, what's the word? Like it kind of wrote the textbook on like, that's how games should be from now on for those kind of games. And the formula hasn't changed since then. There's been some duds with like Resident Evil 6 and stuff like that. But there's been, I feel like the Uncharted games and the modern Tomb Raider games and stuff, they all kind of copy that kind of formula. I feel so many games have so much to owe to Resident Evil 4. And then when they did Resident Evil 2 remake in the same style, and the 3 remake, which were just 3 got a little bit of hate because it was a bit of a short game, but the remakes of them were just such good games as well. And it's the same team bringing this one. I'm so excited for it. I need to get an Oculus Rift 2, or I need to come and play yours, Dan, in the meantime, to play the Resident Evil 4 VR to get myself even more hyped.
The Quest, isn't it? That's the
Quest. I keep calling it. Is it the Rift, the Quest? I can't.
The Rift's the old school one, yeah.
The old school one, the Quest. Thank you, Ravi. The Quest, the Oculus Quest. People were probably screaming at me for the last 5 minutes there. If you can't tell I'm excited, I'm really excited for this.
I've got a feeling Capcom listen as well. They're like, what can we make Joe buy?
It's just, this is it, Sega and Capcom. We've got, what can we make him spend his money on again?
So yeah, it does look really good though. So if you want to check out and what we know so far in the little trailer, we'll link that up. We've got about a year to wait for it, but everything we know so far at theretrohour.com. Now, we did mention our After Hours podcast, which is our patrons exclusive show that we do, because, we do have a little Patreon that we run. We don't like to talk about too much. But, we do appreciate it when we get people on there who show us a bit of a support. Because, that's what it is, really. We have a Patreon just to ensure that all the running costs of doing a weekly podcast are paid for. Think of it as a little tip jar where, for the cost of as low as a cup of coffee once a month, you can just make sure that we can continue bringing you this podcast every single week and bring you these incredible guests as well. Because, we put a lot of work into this. Even when we go on holiday, we make sure that it's covered. We never take a week off, do we? So we really appreciate all the support that we get on Patreon. And we're getting ready for this month's Patrons Hangout as well. Next weekend, Sunday 26th of June.
Yeah.
That work for you guys?
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds perfect. Yeah. Father's Day this Sunday. My second ever one. So the 26th sounds very, very good to me.
26th of June, we'll get that in the calendar, 8 p.m. UK time. So if you want to join us for that, it's really, the Hangouts are just a giggle, aren't they? It's where we get a bunch of us together. We kind of show our pickups and stuff. We just have a bit of a nerd out about everything retro, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Crack open a few beers as well, usually. Ravi always says it's a bit like a pub hangout. Find myself bringing like nuts and crisps to it sometimes as well. Stuffing my face on camera. It is really fun to hang out. And, I used to worry sometimes like, oh God, what are we all going to talk about? But that doesn't happen. Like sometimes it gets to about 10 o'clock, 10:30, and we go, right, we better shoot off now because of wives are probably tapping their watches, going, they got to go to bed for work the next day. But it is really fun, and as you say, we just love like seeing people's collections and showing off what people have bought recently, and we learn a lot as well, and learn a lot about like Facebook groups and stuff, which have been going off, and like I say, we get a lot of news kind of stuff from there as well, so it's good for us. And then also, I like to spend money when I'm on it because I just love seeing what everybody else has been buying, and then I just want it. But yeah, it is really fun.
Yeah, so we'd love to see you at the next one, happening again next weekend, Sunday, 26th of June, 8 p.m. UK time. If you join us on Patreon this weekend, you'll see the link that'll be posted in there. And we're going to be recording another episode of our Patrons-only podcast, The After Hours, that will be out next weekend too. So you get access to those. And also you get the main show early some weeks. I think actually last week, Patrons got it about a week early. Because we've been away. You get extra patrons-only content on each week's show. You get it ad-free as well. But really the main reason you're doing it, like I said, is just to continue keeping the show coming out every single week. And for backing us on Patreon, you will find your place in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, and that is the
Hall of Fame.
And we've got some new patrons, so a massive thank you to our latest supporters. A big thank you, Ben Litchfield,
Tom Gambill,
AB,
and Jason H, who all backed us on Patreon over the last week or two. We really appreciate your support, and if you'd like to find your place alongside them in the Hall of Fame and back this show, all the details for our Patreon are at theretrohour.com. Right, then we're going to be talking Road Rash with our guest Randy Breen very soon. Before we do that, a few more stories to get into. Now we need to talk about a big announcement from the Duke Nukem world in just a minute, but this is quite interesting. NASA have released a totally rad Roman telescope retro video game.
Yeah, I found this quite interesting actually. It's basically one of these games that's kind of, a lot of companies have been doing them to like promote something, or it's just a fun little game. It's about kind of going around and collecting galaxies, exoplanets, supernovas, like dark matter and black holes. The interesting thing is it's a web-based game, but it's on an official NASA site. And I find this really interesting. Like, space used to be one thing that everybody was into. And it would be...
the Patrick Moore Sky at Night books.
Yeah, but also people would get really excited about it. And I think, like, recently there's... I don't know, maybe it's been with, Elon Musk company and stuff. There's been space, but it's kind of not been that exciting and it's not been that hyped. Now, this game is about the launch of a new telescope, which is going to come out, which is the Roman Space Telescope, which is basically after the Hubble telescope came out. This is a new, better telescope that's coming out, and it's going to be able to look a lot further and be able to reveal a lot of things. Now, that's not massively exciting. Back in the days, it would have been quite exciting. But
we might see aliens, Ravi. That could be amazing.
Maybe they'll find aliens or a planet full of Dan Woods. But
Planet of Amigas.
But yeah, I find it interesting that NASA's actually trying to get people engaged doing a game, and just to see a game on a .gov domain as well is pretty interesting as well. What do you guys think?
Yeah, because this looks really old school. I mean, they've gone for that kind of pixel 8-bit graphics. And actually, the article on CNET says it's perfect for Stranger Things fans who are reveling in 80s nostalgia right now. It does feel like, Kate Bush running up that hill is like being top 5 in the UK charts again, thanks to Stranger Things.
Well, it's also like,
week.
I don't know if you've seen the film The Martian, where they try to get interest back into NASA and back into space, and the public aren't really kind of going for it, or they're not as feverish as they were before. I think like something like this, it's sad that it's kind of needed, but they're trying to hit the right direction and the right audience and get people back into it. I love space. I've always loved space, and I think we should talk more about space on the podcast as well.
I do love that the game Roman Space Observer, it's written in the Space Invaders like font, and it's very self-aware, which I do really like about it. And I was playing it before we, joined the chat today. Took me a minute to figure out what I was meant to be doing. I thought it was going to be like the old Flash helicopter game where you were like, which like all of them have been like recently, like you say, so many different companies are doing it. Didn't Dell do it? And I think Jennifer Lopez did it at some point.
Yeah.
But it's not like that. It's, you know, it's a little bit more like Asteroids, but without shooting. You just have to kind of fly over everything and, you know, land on it and click on it, which is pretty fun. But like you say, I think it is just to build that hype about space again.
Yeah, and
like
maybe
say,
get
people
kids
interested.
like asking what is a exoplanet or what's, you know, dark matter and stuff like that. And they're right, it does kind of play into that Stranger Things kind of concept of an alternate world and stuff like that. And, you know, getting people like excited about something else or what could be out there.
Yeah, the 80s are so hot right now, so it does seem a good way to get it in front of people. So if you want to play that, you can play it in your web browser right now. We'll link that up in our show notes as well. Now, of course, we had John St. John, the voice of Duke Nukem, who we regard as, the official voice of Duke Nukem, on the show a couple of weeks ago. And we did ask him about, is there a possibility of a Duke Nukem movie? And he said, well, there is a script out there, but he's not sure if it'll happen anytime soon. Then literally, last week, it got announced that apparently the team behind Cobra Kai are working on a movie adaptation of Duke Nukem.
They've been listening to the podcast as well, haven't they?
What can they sell to Joe? What can they make him go watch?
It's, you know what, like when we had John on, he said it wouldn't work without CGI. And he also said, it's got to be really out there. It's got to be like pretty brutal. It's got to have some like edgy jokes. Watching Cobra Kai, I felt that they got that tone right. Like with Cobra Kai, they had, 80s throwback and stuff that's not seen as amazingly PC today. They talked a lot about that, dealing with that kind of culture from, like the actual Cobra Kai group. And they also had mega violence in there as well, which really, when I first originally watched the series, I was like, oh, quite surprised by how violent it actually got. I was like, wow, it took me back a bit. And I think if anybody could do it, they seem to have bought an 80s brand back well and kind of, brought it into relevant modern times and kind of jazzed it up a bit. Hopefully it will work with Duke.
Well, they're saying here, if you look through the comments on this Kotaku article that I'll link in the show notes, some people are saying in there that, Duke Nukem's a franchise from the 90s that, people don't know today. Young people are not going to know it, so it's not going to work. But you can say the same about Karate Kid and Cobra Kai.
Yeah, exactly.
They managed to span the generations with that, didn't they? And bring it back for a new audience.
And they did it in a funny way. They had the original people were out of touch. They were like still fighting this stupid fight that wasn't relevant to anything, And hopefully they could do that with this approach.
I'm hoping. I mean, it does make sense, but when we did have John on, he said the only way he thinks it would work is if Duke has a son who's like trying to keep him in line. So Duke has aged. Duke is, a 50 or 60-year-old bloke, like it's 30 years later kind of thing.
Like Johnny Lawrence.
Yeah. And it is literally, he now has a son who is like telling him these things aren't PC. Because of that is kind of like Ravi says, that is kind of what happens in Cobra Kai. He's got the lad that he trains in the first 2 seasons and stuff, kind of keeping Johnny on the straight and narrow with what he can and can't say and what's kind of PC and stuff, because of Duke Nukem is of his time, but it is difficult because of, there is that argument of there, would I want it as real life or CG? Because I think CG would be fun, but then would I want it live action, and would I want it to be like Deadpool and that ultra silly, ultra violence, or do you want it to be a little bit more serious? People are calling for John Cena to play him, but I don't know. I think John Cena has the look and he obviously has the muscles and everything, but does he have the funniness and the voice? Do you know what I mean? And John St. John, I have him on Facebook and he posted about it the other day and he was like, oh, interesting that this is actually going ahead now.
So he's not involved.
But at the moment, he said that he isn't, well, he didn't put whether he's involved or not, but he said he would love to voice him, or at least, the very least, have a cameo of some sort in the movie.
They've got to at least give him that.
Yeah, they've got to give him a cameo, surely.
And to be honest, like the CG thing, like I always prefer live action. Like the only CG thing I like is like Ratatouille and stuff like that.
The Disney stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So like for me, if it was CG, I probably wouldn't watch it, to be honest. Like,
Oh, you've got to. The retro hour.
yeah, no. Even Sonic, I couldn't stand.
Says a man that didn't watch Sonic the Hedgehog for about a year.
I've watched it now.
Yeah, I think this seems to be good, and hopefully riding off the success of Cobra Kai, it could be interesting if they do the right approach, if they get the right people involved, if they get the right actors as well. And I think humor-wise, they did get the tone of humor right with Karate Kid, and it was like self-deprecating as well. It was taking the mick out of itself, and they also twisted it as well, which hopefully they could do with Duke, twist the kind of storyline or make it, I don't know, was Duke a good guy or a bad guy? Like, that could be an interesting dynamic to play with.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, this could be terrible, but I've got a feeling that,
Potentially,
it doesn't.
Every video game movie has the potential to be terrible, doesn't it?
But I think they've got the right team there. I mean, if Cobra Kai can do it that well with Karate Kid, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them now. Another big franchise.
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
Everyone's going to be expecting good things from it. So that's all we know so far. I mean, there's been no other announcements, but obviously one that we'll keep an eye on. Now, Joe, you're a bit distracted before we play today. You've been playing Elden Ring that's been demade for the Game Boy that you can play in a web browser.
This is awesome. I said it earlier on today. I am a modern gamer as well as a retro gamer, and I have been loving Elden Ring. I'm like 120 hours into it, like doing everything you can possibly do in it, trying to 100% it. I've got a kid, so I only get to play it for a couple of hours at night.
Explain to me what it is. Sorry.
So
I've seen all the streamers are streaming it. I've heard of the name.
So
I'm like,
it's the latest game from Software, and From Software are responsible. For those who don't know, they made the Souls games, so Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, the ultra hard action RPG games. And essentially those games are quite linear. They're built in quite big worlds, but they're always quite linear. Like, do you want to go this way or do you want to go that way? Like, do you want to go through the graveyard or do you want to go through the town, kind of thing? It's not as simple as that, but the exploration of them and stuff isn't that grand. Elden Ring is essentially the latest game from them. It's very much like Dark Souls. It's like
action RPG.
It's an action RPG, and it's hard as nails, and it's completely open world. It is massive. It's absolutely huge, and it's one of these games like Skyrim. You just run off. You just kind of go, here's the game, go do your thing, go talk to people, go find out what you're meant to go do. Do you know what I mean? Go to this castle, go to that cave
with NPCs and stuff. So, like, how has this translated onto the Game Boy then? How have they created this open world?
So now we've got that out of the way. It's been ported to the Game Boy by a Reddit user called Shin. He's responsible for the new Game Boy version. It's very, very, very similar to the Zelda game, which came out on the Game Boy, which was remade recently. Well, I say recently, it was remade about 3 years ago now, but Zelda Link's Awakening is really similar to that, to a point where I think it's actually even using a lot of the same sprites and stuff. But essentially, he hasn't remade the entire game. He's remade the first kind of couple of hours of the game and condensed it into about 20 minutes, half an hour worth of gameplay by the looks of things. Because, like, as you say, how are you going to get this like big 200-hour game, 100-hour game onto a Game Boy? Well, I think the bottom line is you can't. You just you take liberties with it and have a bit of fun. But if you're a fan of Elden Ring and you're a fan of Game Boy games and retro games, you can play it in browser, which obviously Dan will link up and everything like that, which is really cool. And it's still there. From Software haven't made him take it down or anything like this.
Yeah, that's another point.
And it was uploaded on the 3rd of June, and we're 2 weeks in now, so it's still there at this point. Like I say, it looks just like Zelda Link's Awakening. But one of the really cool things is the From Software games, they have a rolling mechanic in it. So a lot of the gameplay is based on, it's all swords and sorcery. So, using your sword and shield and stuff, or using your magic. But when you get attacked, you can roll out the way. So there's a big rolling mechanic in these games, and they've got the rolling mechanic in the Game Boy version. So you can roll into the enemies and roll away from them and stuff like that, which I think they've done really, really well. But essentially, the game has only got the first 3 bosses by the looks of things to play, or first 4 bosses, I think it might be. I was playing it earlier on and I was having fun with it. Really hard, just like the actual Elden Ring game. But to kind of put that into perspective, there's over 250 bosses in the actual Elden Ring. So I don't think they would have ever fit it in there, and I couldn't find the leveling up system or anything like that. The actual kind of RPG elements don't seem to be there. It seems to be more just action orientated. But
Does
it's
it
really
play
fun.
on the original Game Boy?
Well,
is it just browser based at the moment?
This is the thing. In his video, in the trailer for it, he has it running on a Game Boy.
I can see it on his website. If you scroll down after the player, there is 2 download links, one for the Game Boy.
Brilliant. There we go.
A ROM file, and one for the Analog Pocket as well.
Oh,
The
fantastic.
Pocket file.
So you can play it on
Nice.
Game Boy. So you can play it on Game
Yeah,
Boy,
yeah.
which is really cool, but you can play it in browser, which is probably, for the simpletons like me, the easier version. That's what I was doing, but it looks so familiar. Like, I know this doesn't mean anything to you guys, but like, I walked off and instantly found one of the first bosses, which is called the Tree Sentinel, and I was like, oh, it's the Tree Sentinel boss, like, and
That's cool.
And it's fun, you know. Like I say, it looks just like Link's Awakening, but there's quite a full playable game here, you know, which, I mean, if you can play it on Game Boy, keep you busy, I guess, for a couple of hours.
Yeah, we do love these D-makes as well, so it's always nice to see a new one. So if you want to download that, I'll put that and everything else we talk about, all the stories every week. You don't have to Google around. We put them all in our show notes for you in your podcast app, or you can head to our website. You'll find them all at theretrohour.com. Now, before we chat to this week's special guest, Randy Breen, Road Rash special coming up in just a moment, let's give a big thank you to one of our loyal supporters of the Retro Hour, who've supported this podcast for how many years now? At Future Publishing, lent their support to this show. And we love Future Publishing.
Many years.
Yeah, I've been reading Future Publishing magazine since I was about 10 years old as well. So it's incredible to have them supporting our podcast. And not only do they celebrate retro video games in, of course, Retro Gamer Mag and several others that they do as well, that, you know, if you enjoy our podcast, you should be reading that each and every month. But also, they celebrate current gen consoles too. And we want to give you a chance to get 3 issues of your favourite Future Publishing gaming mag for just £1. So that is an incredible saving of up to 95% off the cover price, just for listeners of the Retro Hour. And this is available on all of Future's gaming mags, of course Retro Gamer, but also Play, Edge and PC Gamer as well. You've actually got Edge in front of you right now, Ravi.
Yeah, because I actually do this deal. So I get Edge every single release, and it's just like absolutely awesome. Really good. Great magazine about the kind of future of gaming. And they're looking at Cuphead, the delicious last course, which is the new DLC for Cuphead, the Evil Dead game as well. They've got an interview in here with John Romero as well, which is he's weighing in on nearly 40 years of games development and coding. And they're also looking at the return of kind of smart glasses, which is interesting. Who remembers the Google Glass? That wasn't massively popular, was it?
They do Play magazine as well, if you're a fan of the PlayStation. Actually, it's a bit of a retro theme to Play magazine this month.
Yeah, they're actually covering the 100 greatest PlayStation games from all time, going from PS1 all the way up to PS5. So they've kind of gone through all 28 years of the PlayStation, which makes me feel so old, 28 years. But they're covering off their top 100 greatest PlayStation games of all time, which just looks really, really cool. And like you say, it's got a retro feel. You know, there's Papa the Rapper, Time Splitters on the front cover there, Resident Evil on the cover there, as well as God of War and Nathan Drake and GTA and all that kind of stuff. So if you're into your retro stuff, this month's Play does look right up our street as well.
And they do PC Gamer, covering Dune, Spice Wars, and Overwatch 2, the cover feature. And, of course, Retro Gamer magazine. This month, the cover feature is a special all about Sonic Origins that, of course, we've been talking about. And they kind of go, you know, to celebrate Sonic's birthday right behind the scenes of this. And also, you get a fantastic 32-page mini magazine detailing their favourite Sonic the Hedgehog moments too. So if you want to check out any of those future magazines, of course, by taking up these offers, you're really supporting the Retro Hour podcast as well. So get 3 issues of your favourite future gaming magazine for just £1 by using our special link, and they'll know that we sent you. And of course, we get credit for that. magazinesdirect.com/retro hour. So open a new tab in your browser or your phone right now. Type this in. You'll get 3 issues of those incredible magazines for just £1. magazinesdirect.com/retro hour and save up to 95% on Retro Gamer, Edge Play or PC Gamer. And a big thank you to our friends at Future Publishing for their support of our show.
And get it quickly as well, because we have so many people saying, oh, I tried to redeem your offer. Do it now, at the time.
Right, the next time to get the inside story on the classic Road Rage games with our special guest, Randy Breen, is next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for our favourite part of the show when we welcome on a very special guest. Now, this week, someone who's been behind some of our favourite games of all time. We can't wait to get stories about working with companies like Electronic Arts, games like Road Rash, and lots more as well. Let's welcome on our fabulous guest this week, the wonderful Randy Breen. How you doing, Randy?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us now. Before we get into the stories of these incredible companies and the games that you've worked on, we always kind of like to, take it back to day one with our guests and find out kind of where your story began. I mean, do you remember what first got you into video games? Do you remember your first ever video game experience?
For me, I think it was more of a transition from pinball machines to video games. When I was a kid, the bowling alleys were a usual stop on the way home from school, and the pinball machines kind of dominated that experience. And I had a couple family friends that had pinball machines in their house. And so that was it was a hobby of sorts. And I think that the Atari was the machine that really gave me the sense of what that potential was as it, transitioned from pinball machines to, some kind of graphic adventure. And, I never owned an Atari. I think that as they came out, I was becoming an adult. I went into the Navy. I was in the Navy for 6 years. And in the Navy, I discovered computer games. And there was a collection of us that gathered around, one PC and then played Wizardry and, mapped out the dungeon on a graph paper because you had to remember where you were going. And I just, that and some combination of Dungeon and Dragon experiences with those people as a tabletop game, that led me into computer games, I think. And I bought my first computer when I was still in the Navy. And really, it was one of the things that got me a job at Electronic Arts, because when I got out of the Navy, I was interested in going back to school, finishing an engineering degree. And I was looking for a summer job. I applied for a technical role at EA accidentally. The fact that I owned a computer, that I was a hobbyist, that was one of the things that caught their eye, apart from my technical background in the military.
I was wondering, you were a general technician, so you worked with all the different departments and you worked on some different titles. What were the differences with EA Sports and stuff, and how did you see the company growing?
I was only in this technical role for a little over 6 months. So I came in, I was, doing whatever needed to be done, which included just setting people's equipment up, that were not necessarily as computer savvy, or, setting up internal networks for the office, that sort of thing. Also etching the PC boards for our own artist workstations. So that was really kind of a generalized experience. So I touched a lot of departments through that, all of the departments really. But when I went into production, I was assigned a few projects, and basically as an assistant producer, you were really kind of attached at the very end of the projects. And I was attached to some notable things. One of them was Madden football. And this was the first Madden football. It was before EA Sports existed. EA Sports became a brand. It was EASN before it was EA Sports. At the time, no one knew that sports were going to become the major segment, and really the biggest, branding component of Electronic Arts. But at the time, Madden Football was it was a title that was originally designed for the Apple IIc and the C64, and it had been in development for almost 5 years, and they were struggling. But I helped get those two products finished and out the door, and then I actually later, as an associate producer, produced the second Madden Football. And, I was happy to do those projects and, privileged in a way, but I didn't have a passion for sports products. And it had more to do with the creative content. I could tell even in the very early days that it was, there was a certain grind to the work. That is, it was both somewhat easier because you didn't have to reproduce the product once it got on an annual schedule. Once they started releasing annualized products, you didn't have to replace the engine every year. You replaced the stats. And so periodically you would replace the engine or do more major updates. But that was less interesting to me. I mean, the creative content of, the other titles that I worked on, I was just more attracted to. Road Rash is an example of that. And, and another dovetail into the Road Rash is that prior to Road Rash, I'd worked on a series of driving games. And I was passionate about driving games, mainly because I was a motorcyclist and it was a hobby. There was something about the experience of driving that it's experiential more so than most of the sports franchises. And I think that, those driving games led me to the conclusion there was an opportunity to reach a wider audience with entertainment elements that combined with the driving experience. And that's what really led to Road Rash.
I know that Road Rash, obviously, legendary game, and Ravi and I, massive fans of it. For so many incredible memories of playing that as a kid. And was that the first kind of in-house type of game at EA that was developed, that there was a lot of pressure to get right then? What are kind of your memories of those initial concept in the early days of Road Rash?
Well, so, it was one of the first. There were more than one in development simultaneously, but Road Rash was really one of the first wholly internally developed titles. Prior to that, in the early days of EA, it was established as a publisher, and what that means is that it's similar to books and music at the time, where a publisher would sign an artist, and EA used to refer to them as EA artists. If you're familiar with the early campaigns at EA, there was a series of ads that were done. Trip Hawkins came out of Apple, and had these experiences with Apple from a marketing standpoint, and he brought some of those styles into EA, and they were provocative statements, and the idea that artists that these groups were treated as artisans was a new idea. And the packaging was unusual. They were like mini albums. They weren't quite as big as a long play record, but maybe 2/3 the size. But they were thin. They had flat copy. They usually opened up, and they had graphics and other material inside the package. And so the nature of the relationship with these creators was really uniquely established with EA. And what that meant was that basically EA would sign the artist, they would fund the projects. The projects were milestone based. And so you would manage the titles externally, and they would hit a milestone and then get paid for the next segment of the project. And so there were checkpoints. And as a producer, you were managing that process. You were both helping the artist by giving them context for how people perceive what they were doing, and feedback from the various groups, stakeholders at Electronic Arts, like marketing and sales. And internally, you were representing the artist and presenting the materials to more or less a board that reviewed these milestones and approved them as a group. And as a young producer, that was it really exposed me to all aspects of the business: finance, legal, marketing, sales. And so, coming back to the question, these processes that were developed, they were really developed to extend the publishing process to these outside organizations. Well, what gradually started to happen was that we ended up with a variety of hybrid situations. And I was a producer on one of those, along with Paul Grace. who's a longtime friend and colleague. The two of us discovered an artist that had a technology but didn't really have a game design that we felt was going to meet the market. And so we collaborated with the artist, who was really an engineer, a programmer. Basically, I kind of acted as a designer. I established some of the art content internally, and Paul and I managed the project collectively. He was more project manager of sorts. That was 680 at TaxHub, and that title did pretty well, but it was basically leading the company into this realm of doing some of the work internally. And there were a couple other groups, Mike Kasaka in particular, started as an internal artist and then kind of migrated into a designer producer role as well. And so there were these projects that didn't fit the original model, but EA started to realize there was some benefits to being able to have that expertise in-house. And so that led to the subject at hand, which is, Road Rash was one of the first fully internally developed titles. And it was compounded by the fact, one of the rationales that really drove the company to do this was also that there was this period where EA considered, reverse engineering they did reverse engineer the Sega Genesis before it was released. By doing that, it gave them leverage for negotiating an agreement with Sega for licensing, and eventually they became a licensee. But it wasn't clear when we were originally developing Road Rash that was going to be the case. So we were just developing Sega titles for the launch in the US. It migrated into an official title through that development period.
It's a pretty kind of hardcore way of getting into the console market, reverse engineering the products.
Well, you have to remember that at the time, EA had not really entered the console market in earnest. There was a couple titles on the 8-bit Nintendo. EA Europe had started, but had done some things, but kind of independently of the US office. And the company really had internal struggle with how to treat console versus PC, because from a financial standpoint, PC was far more attractive because it didn't carry the license. Yeah. And a lot of it also had to do with the hardware nature of the console business. That is, those cartridges were horrifically expensive because you had to manufacture hardware to produce each unit. And that meant that the cost of goods were very high. And it meant that, in order to fulfill the product at retail, you had to carry a huge balance sheet. And everyone had the presence of the Atari collapse in the mid 80s was still in everyone's mind. And there were even a couple of senior people at EA that came out of Atari. They just didn't want to go back to that. So I think that it was hard for the company to overcome that. But by the time the Genesis was coming, it was pretty clear that they, in order to be competitive, they needed to be in the market.
And I guess Electronic Arts had a good background with tools as well, with stuff like developing Deluxe Paint and, that whole kind of suite. There must have been a good set of resources to go into developing your own titles.
Yes, that's right. And, those started out as developer tools, but there was an opportunity for the company to have really maintained a division that might be similar to what Adobe is now. It's just that it couldn't find the mind space to maintain that, unfortunately. But in my view, that was a missed opportunity for EA. I think it's hard to say whether it could have been successful or not, because, obviously it's a pretty different business model. And, I just think that from a financial standpoint and from a creative standpoint, the company was capable of doing more things, and it chose to really just stay focused on games.
Well, I was also wondering, like, where did the concept originally come from? You mentioned that you were a biker. Were you like watching lots of Akira, or had you seen any biker gangs fighting with chains or anything?
Yeah, no. I had mentioned that I'd worked on these driving games, which included Indianapolis 500, which was produced by Papyrus before they became independent. Well, they published under Virgin for a while, I think. But Indy 500 was one of the first, if not the first, fully 3D simulations for driving, and it was fantastic, for its time, but it was also horribly difficult. and so, if you didn't have a very high sensitivity to what to look for in order to sense what the car was doing and then maintain concentration long enough, you could have a miserable experience, because it was, it's just so challenging to control the car with a keyboard. And so it kind of informed me that, there's this opportunity. There were people that wanted to play it, but really couldn't experience it. And even some of the people that might enjoy aspects of it really didn't have the patience to just stay intently concentrated on simply making small adjustments to maintain, lap times, lap after lap. That, some people just don't have that mindset. And so I was kind of adamant that there was an opportunity to do something with entertainment in that, while still having an experiential kind of, environment. And, there were a number of car games with guns on them and so on. And I just thought that was a little too, it just didn't seem to make sense. I mean, for one thing, you're trying to drive in one direction and aim in another direction. And it just, it didn't hold together in my mind, both from a fantasy standpoint or from, an interactivity standpoint. And so the thing that struck me with motorcycles was that, first of all, I was toying with racing, and, the competition, even in those, I mean, this goes back, far before the computer game industry, but motorcycle competition can get kind of physical. And it's interesting because you can see the rider on the machine, as opposed to, a car where you might see the helmet sticking out, in an open cockpit. And the fact that the rider is fully visible, I thought was kind of exciting, that there was an opportunity to create drama from, that physicality. And the other thing, what I was getting at with the racing is that in racing, it's not unusual for these riders to kind of elbow and kick each other. And, it's not very common, but it happens. And, I think that I put that together. There was, I was a fan of Akira. And in fact, in my presentation for the concept, I presented both these shots of, what's the equivalent of MotoGP, where riders were actually shoving off each other, entering a turn, and also some of the gang material from Akira, along with some other things, the bike pump scene from Breaking Away.
For me, it was always like there was a certain edginess with bikers, especially like biker gangs. And we have the Isle of Man TT races here, and they're absolutely insane. So it really fit into that kind of idea of, I'm playing an edgy game. And it really kind of changed the demographic, especially stuff like winning prizes between the racers and ideas like that. Yeah, really, really like the concept behind it.
Yeah. Well, there was one other technical thing that was one of the rationales for the product. I mean, for me, it was really just a justification because I really wanted to do a motorcycle game anyway. But for a publisher, there were a number of people that were expressing the idea, well, people are more into cars than they are motorcycles. And my argument for that is, well, they may not want to own a motorcycle, but I think it's more aspirational. And so, people that wouldn't necessarily go buy a motorcycle or think to do this in real life might express the fantasy of it in a way that a car seems a little more ordinary. No, that's right.
And the fact that they're super bikes as well really changes it.
Yeah.
Like if you were in a kind of Harley Davidson or something, I think it would probably be a totally different game.
Well, and in fact, that was an argument that internally that I can come back to. But the technical element was that with the Sega, you could only have 7 sprites on a line, and if you displayed 8, they would start to disappear randomly. It's just a buffer issue. The fact that you have these moving elements, these sprites, which the motorcycle is made up of, you can't really tell where things are going to be if you have a really wide range of situations. And, it's not just the bikes, it's also like the trees that were alongside the road or just objects that are incidental apart from the road effect itself. And so one of the things that's interesting about, the motorcycles is that they're vertical. So the sprite body is stacked vertically, whereas a car was more horizontal. And so to represent the car in a meaningful way that it was large enough, you actually ran more risk of running into the sprite issue if the car was bigger. And so with the bikes, we could actually afford to make the characters a little larger because they were vertical for the most part.
I was wondering, going from the kind of 2-player option in the first one of, taking turns to split screen for the second, was that a huge challenge?
Well, so we wanted to do the split screen all along. All of us felt strongly that it's the kind of game that would be more enjoyable to be able to play with someone else. The problem was it was just too much work to get that done in the first project. And, this was really not an unusual situation for first generation titles, is that you have all these ideas, you're trying to produce something in a period that's described. You don't know how long that's going to be because there's a certain element of experimentation. And then you start to have to pull back on aspirations. And one of those was the split screen, wasn't going to make the first cut before we were at a point where the company needed us to ship the title. And it was also the fact that, it's an original title, so there was no idea whether it was going to be successful or not. And so, we needed to get one out into the market to just know that there was an audience for this thing. But by the time we were finished, it was already clear it was going to be successful enough to justify a sequel. And we rolled right into the sequel from that. And we had a long list of things that we wanted to do, and split screen was just one of those. So the second title was actually, it was probably the most efficient because it was very, very clear right from the outset what we wanted to do. And we already had a team that was up and running and effective.
Well, obviously, it was a massive franchise by now. And when we got to the third game, Road Rash 3, that felt like it was really pushing the hardware of the 16-bit consoles. Felt like the Sega Genesis was creaking a bit under Road Rash 3.
Yeah.
What features do you wish you could have added to that title then? And were there limitations on the hardware that meant that you couldn't?
At this point, it's a little hard for me to parse that because these things kind of blur together over time. And, I think that you're trying to, both add enough material to rationalize or justify the value of another sequel. And I think that leads you to stretch out and try and do things that may have seemed less practical when you were starting out. And so I think that it was really just kind of a natural extension of that process. And, by the time that title was finished, the Genesis was being superseded. So, my focus was actually split at that point. I was first on the third generation title fully. And then over the course of development, I became more and more focused on the 3DO title. which was started in parallel, but I ended up moving over more completely towards the end.
Well, the 3DO, I mean, obviously EA had a big connection there with, Trip heading 3DO. And that version as well, I remember, I've got a 3DO. If I set it up, that is still my go-to game, to play first on the 3DO. I love that version of Road Rash on there. And, when I first saw that digitized FMV, that was at the beginning as well. I mean, that was mind-blowing for the time. How did you kind of take advantage to this system having more power then? And what kind of happened there then? What did you put in there?
Well, the video was something that I really pitched hard, but it wasn't really part of the initial project. I mean, the project started off focused on the game content, as it should. The focus was on really improving the graphics and the performance. And, the machine really allowed us to do a variety of things that weren't possible. I mean, obviously, just the expression of more color was huge, and more detail in the scenes, more objects. But there was a number of things that were, we took different, instead of hand-drawn animation, we actually did a rotoscope by setting up in a photographer's studio. We set up, a range of cameras around a rider that was positioned on a motorcycle, and the motorcycle's still at EA. At the time, I was arguing to buy a motorcycle for the purpose of creating the animation, and no one had bought a prop before like that. and they just thought that it was ridiculous that I was arguing that we should buy a motorcycle at, a software company. But I got approved to do that. And then we created a set of leathers that were, the most obnoxious colors you can imagine. But against a green screen, we could pull the animation off the background. I should say we could pull each frame of the animation off the background and then recolor them because they were effectively encoded, physically. And that led to, I think both, much higher quality animation just because of the amount of material we could create. I think that it made the scenes more authentic, and we did similar things with the cars and so on. The scene wasn't quite as elaborate because the focus was on the riders, but the content for that game, it was challenging, and it was also, I think, rewarding because it started to produce material that really we weren't able to create up to that point. And that said, by the time we started to see the game coming together, and there's also, I think, Laurie Washbaum in particular did an amazing job from an art standpoint in creating a look. Louis Schremak is another artist that's, notable for that, creating that style.
It was amazing, the menus and the way that characters were drawn on there. It really had a great identity.
Yeah, no, and I think that aspect of the product was really, I think, shining. And at the same time, we had this CD and we had all of the space that we had the potential of utilizing. And I just felt like there was an opportunity to do more from an entertainment space. And there was kind of a history from the Sega that led to it, because we had these little vignettes at the end of the races on the Genesis that were simple animations. And so they really became a touch point for what could be done with video. And then that led to the video vignettes that went into the 3D version, which we produced towards the end of the project.
I know that version as well also came out on the original PlayStation, and that was a great version of Road Rash on the PlayStation. Then we got to Road Rash 3D on the PlayStation as well. I mean, which was a bit of a departure. Obviously, it had the kind of the polygon 3D graphics in there. Yeah. How was it like working on that project, and what were the challenges of doing that?
So in the end, we produced a product that was successful, but it was a struggle. The fact is that I think that this is one of the things that actually was a roadblock for, excuse the pun, for Road Rash, in the sense that, the early products were, sprite-based games. The transition to 3D was coming. We all knew it. I was producing 3D products alongside these, animated sprite-based products. And at the same time, I felt like different technologies need to be applied for different subjects appropriately. I thought that the sprite technology was effective for what Road Rash was, and it was effective even on the PlayStation 1, in its first title. But transitioning to 3D was becoming so obvious to people that everybody, it's like, you've probably heard the expression, everything black. In this case, everything 3D, so there was an assumption that we would just make a 3D product because that's where the technology was going. And as much as I wanted to do that, I knew what the challenges were. I had relationships with the guys at DSI, which became EA Canada. We did a driving game together when I was a producer and they were an external artist. And they were eventually acquired and that studio developed, and that studio developed Need for Speed. When you look at the two products from a technical standpoint at the time, that is the Road Rash 3D and Need for Speed, and I'm talking about the first 3D iterations of each, I was really measured by the same measure that they were, which is, how big is the staff? How much does it cost? How long did it take to make the product? How much revenue is it going to generate? And the issue is that if you have a polygon object that is more or less a series of triangles that are stacked boxes, and then maybe have special conditions to animate the rear window and the front tires, then that technical challenge is very different than animating a figure on an object that itself is more complicated than the car, and then have detachable elements from it, like the clubs and chains, and the rider itself needs to detach and articulate. Yeah. And I'm trying to explain this to people, that this is a hard problem to solve when you're dealing with a very simplistic set of polygons, and at some point I think I just became entirely frustrated by the fact that, there didn't seem to be an understanding that the nature of our problem was harder, and it wasn't that it wasn't unsolvable. It was going to take more time to do it. And, so that period was not a happy moment for me, I'm afraid.
Do you think?
But eventually, the title was finished, and it did produce good revenue. It just, I think that it actually really kind of stalled future development. There was the one title after 3D, but by that time, that was about the time that I was leaving EA.
Do you think we'll ever see a Road Rash game in the future? And have you played Road Redemption as well, which is kind of a modern Road Rash inspired game?
I have played Road Redemption. It's been a while. And EA's tried a number of times. There was an effort to produce a new one even before I left. These things, they take the right collection of people, and those people need to have a vision for what they're doing. And EA struggled with original titles at that point in time. I love the fact that we had produced an original title, and the reality was that it was more profitable. Even if it didn't sell more units, it was more profitable than most of the other titles because it didn't have the license fee on it. And I just love the fact that we were creating something. And, we tried to do a couple other originals internally, and those didn't make the market because the company gradually became less comfortable taking those risks. And those risks are meaningful because, when you're getting into the console business and you're talking about requiring millions of units to be sold in order to overcome not just the development effort, but the cost of goods, which even though it's a CD are expensive because there's a license fee on the CD. So, you have to pay the license fee before the product is shipped. So it's effectively not very different than a hardware cost of goods. You compound both the development cost, these material costs for packaging, and then the marketing costs in order to drive enough sales that they overcome all of those things. The company becomes more risk averse, and that's why you see sequels and I think that that's one of the drivers for EA Sports, as we were talking about earlier, is that it's a very reliable business model.
Well, a really interesting game that came out in the early 90s that you were involved with was a game called Labyrinth of Time.
Yes.
And I remember playing that on the Commodore CD-TV. That was really, it was an Amiga 500 in like a VCR kind of box with a CD-ROM drive on there.
Yeah.
And I know it came out on the PC and also the CD32 console as well. And that kind of reminded me a bit of, it was a beautiful game, a bit like Myst. I mean,
it is.
What kind of memories have you, what kind of memories have you got of that title then?
It is, very much like Myst. And I think that it is interesting that you have a title like Myst that is, I think even now, is fairly widely known to anybody that, was kind of, part of the marketplace in the 90s. But, you have other titles like Labyrinth of Time that really didn't quite break through that. And, they were early exercises in what's possible for an immersive environment. And, I thought it was, Labyrinth was a beautiful product, but, it didn't quite, find the market to, generate the excitement that Myst did.
I thought those graphics, they must have took such a long time to render all of those 3D gorgeous graphics that you had in there.
Yeah. Well, but, rendering is an automated process once you've got it set up. So once you have the scene established, it becomes more production oriented. So there is some efficiency in that regard.
Well, speaking of titles that I loved back then as well, I mean, I was a big fan of Flashback. That was one of my favorite kind of action adventure games. And Fade to Black was the sequel to that as well, which I know you were the producer on that game.
Yeah.
Where did the idea of that sequel come from then, and what was kind of the background on Fade to Black?
Well, that was a relationship with Delphine that also, was really two studios. It was the Fade to Black team was in Paris, and the Adeline team and Twin Sins Adventure was in Lyon. And, I think that those are titles that I had a relationship with EA Europe, and it led me to produce those titles, but it was really, those were, visions that came from each of those two studios. And they were really more in the tradition of the early EA model where developers, conceived of an idea and then pitch that to, producers at EA or other publishers. And then we would sign them and help them bring those titles to market. So in both of those cases, I think that we were trying to help them understand how the US market would perceive them. I think both of those titles, they were more popular in Europe than they were in the US. And part of that is the US can be kind of idiosyncratic, and it's not so much necessarily that the audience didn't exist. I think that in a lot of cases, marketing and sales might have more challenge finding a way to speak to that audience and attract it. And I think that was the case in both of those products.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed Fade to Black. I mean, obviously, Flashback was a 2D game, and then I found it a bit more difficult than Flashback, but I wonder, were there kind of challenges in taking, a previously 2D universe and gameplay and transitioning that into 3D? Do you know if they kind of had any struggles there?
Well, I think that was true for most games that were transitioning in that regard, for one way or another. I was describing some of the technical issues associated with Road Rash coming to 3D. With regards to animated figures, and really, I think that in some ways it's more of a design challenge. And there was an aspect of this with Road Rash as well. Road Rash had scrolling roads. Basically, you're creating the illusion of a road passing underneath you, by having kind of a cycling set of colors that represent you moving forward, and also scrolling the road side to side, which is how you represent turns. And so it's not unlike, you're on an imaginary conveyor belt that has a potential to, move right and left in front of you. That creates certain constraints and makes the problem of moving through the world easier. Once you go to 3D, you have the potential to turn around and go back the other way. And, that's a design challenge to establish both, some constraint that doesn't take you out of the world, but also, really find, reasons either to do it or not to do it, and to make that enjoyable in all the conditions the game can be played. And so when you take a figure that can move around in a scene, if that figure is moving side to side, that is a very limited constraint that allows you to design to a very focused objective. And as soon as you have more of a free-form environment, you have to build conditions for that. And I think that that's the case here.
Well, Randy, it's been amazing reminiscing on, just a small part of your career that I know continues strong today. I mean, is there anything that you're working on these days then that we should look out for?
I'm advising for Sword, which is a blockchain product based out of Denmark. I've been involved in a variety of MMOs, and that goes back even before Galaxies, Star Wars Galaxies. So I think that, first of all, the economy of MMOs really lends itself to a blockchain application. That is the ability to basically take the marketplace and externalize it. And I've felt for some time that that players really shouldn't be restricted to how they are able to transact on content that they've produced through their activities, but also through collection or through crafting or through purchase. And, an example of this is, you've been able to buy characters in MMOs for years, but that's a gray market activity. So if you want to buy a character from World of Warcraft, you can do it. But if you get caught, that account might get banned. And, I think that I understand the argument. I mean, at the time, Sony Online was developing Star Wars Galaxies, and their point of view was that if you allow people to transact on and trade these characters, it has the potential to ruin the community. Even then I felt like that was an artificial constraint. The real issue was they weren't participating in the transaction, so that's the first order issue, is that they're not making any money from it. And they're thinking about their revenue stream associated with the time people stay in a title. This was a retention method. At the same time, what I knew was that the people that were buying these titles or these characters were mostly people that wanted a second or third character because they didn't want to grind for a year or two to get to a reasonable level. And so they would, skip past that by buying a character and then sometimes even running two characters simultaneously. The Ember Sword team both has a passion for these older style, MMOs. They come out of some of the traditional spaces, and they have a strong belief in this idea that opening these markets and allowing people to trade these things more generously, I think, is in the interest of everyone. It's a different business model, I think, that's quite exciting.
Well, Randy, it's incredible to hear that the passion is still there, and you're continuing to carve new paths for gaming as well. So if people want to check out Ember Sword and Bright Star Studios, I'll put a link in our show notes as well. Definitely have a look at that. And Randy, it's been incredible to reminisce with you as well. Thank you so much for coming on and being our guest this week.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.